Good morning. My name is Dr. Brad Pragnell, and I'm a consultant with Payments Canada. I would like to welcome you to our session here at the Payments Canada Summit, Real-Time Payment Success Stories, Brazil, India, and Beyond. Real-time payment systems have been implemented in nearly 79 countries, and May 2023 represents 15 years since the launch of UK Faster Payments. What have we learned in those 15 years? What are the challenges that we've addressed in terms of collaboration and commercialization? With us, we've got three noted experts drawn from across the globe. And I would like to start with some introductions. So if each of the panelists can introduce themselves, I would like to start with Carlos Brandt.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Brad, for inviting me to the 2023 Payments Canada Summit. It's such a great pleasure to be here and exchange views and experience with all of you today. Great to share this panel with Steve and May in a way that we can bring perspectives from different parts of the globe. My name is Carlos Brandt. I'm the head of PIX Management and Operations at the Central Bank of Brazil. I have been dedicated to the development and implementation of our instant payment ecosystem since the very beginning. And I'm currently in charge of PIX operations and leading the design of new products and functionalities in PIX. I have been in real-time payments for more than 20 years since the implementation of our TGS system in 2002. It's a long but exciting journey with lots of challenges. Now working with retail payments, we can see the impact of our work in our everyday life, which of course brings a lot of extra motivation for what we do. Thanks again.
Thank you, Carlos. And now Steve.
All right, thanks, Brad. And also, I just want to say how excited I'm to be here at the summit and also speaking with May and Carlos. Thank you so much. This is very exciting to see just how many different places in the globe we can get into one panel. So thanks for doing this, Brad. So my name is Steve Haley. I'm the Director of Market Development at the Mojaloop Foundation. Mojaloop Foundation manages a real-time retail payments resource base, primarily a code base for an instant payment system that was designed primarily to focus on the interconnection of instant payments between both banks and non-banks, big banks, large mobile money providers, even small microfinance and credit unions, to get access to the same system. It's an open source software, so it allows for countries to have their own sovereign payment system without having a dependency on other countries. But overall, though, things like UPI here where I live in India and a number of other ones, including PIX, have seen massive growth from having very low or zero transaction fees. The problem with that is these are expensive things to run. So everything that Mojaloop was built towards was to reduce the cost of deploying, operating, and maintaining an instant payment system so that we can get those retail fees down to as close to zero, if not zero, as possible. My background, I've been working in instant payments and emerging markets for about 15 years, primarily in emerging markets, from nonprofits and mobile money. And working for a large mobile money company, I came across the problem of we just couldn't grow without interoperability, and we didn't have a seat at the table when the banks were deciding what the country was going to look like. And when we weren't actually invited because we were the biggest player, it wasn't good enough because there were a lot more banks than there were us. And so what we really focus on is how do we make sure that that table includes everyone, and that the solution that's designed for is built not just for mobile money and other financial institutions to be an add-on, but primary participants. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Steve. And May, could you just introduce yourself and give us a little bit of background about your role at AP Plus?
Sure, thanks, Brad. Thanks again for having me, and also along with Steve and Carlos. So very excited to be here. So hi everyone, I'm May Lam. I'm the Chief Information Officer at Australian Payment Plus. AP Plus is just over a year old, and we bring together Australia's 3 domestic payment providers: BPay Group, EFTPOS, MPP Australia into one integrated entity. Our capabilities include Australian domestic debit network, real-time payment infrastructure, secure bill payment, digital identity exchange, QR code payment, wallet as a service solutions, and open payment experiences. So this amalgamation enabled AP Plus to be uniquely placed to create a more competitive and coordinated entity that is strategically placed to respond to the impacts of the regulatory and the technological change today into the future. Prior to joining AP Plus, I was a partner at EY, where I led the payment practice for Asia Pacific and fintech practice for Oceania. I'm a payment software engineer by trade and have been having the joy of payments ecosystem for the last 20 years.
Great. Thank you very much, May. And I might actually start with you. So Australia introduced the new payments platform back in 2018. It was offered through an industry consortium. And can you provide us maybe with a little bit of background around the new payments platform's development and growth, and particularly in the period since its launch in early 2018 to now?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So the new payments platform, or MPP, is Australian real-time payment infrastructure. It was designed to be a more modern payment system that would deliver speed, be always available 24/7, and have the ability to leverage the ISO 20022 messaging format to include rich data beyond payment instructions. It also offers a simpler addressing service via what we call the Pay ID alias, which links to an easy remember piece of information like of mobile phone numbers or email address. It was definitely a collaborative achievement, which I'm sure that we will unpack further about that, where an industry consortium of financial institutions came together to develop it together. So 5 years on since the launch, the MPP accounts for 1 in 3 account-to-account payments in Australia, reaching over 88 million accounts. And we have the vast majority of financial institutions, both large and small, and an increasing growing number of fintechs participating in MPP. MPP started off being used as a simple push payment, mainly for P2P payments, but has now grown to cover a wide range of use cases, including merchant disbursements, travel insurance claim, payroll, rental payments, share trading, and also of different money transfers. What also through COVID we see more is that through that it's been a growing number of small businesses, from trade people, hairdresser, restaurant, to business selling online on marketplaces. It was also used as a scale by our government welfare agency during the pandemic to provide the relief payments into the hands of citizens immediately, even over the weekends. Some of the key stats today, so the platform, probably compared to Brazil or India, is not big, but for Australia it's quite big, so we are quite proud of that. So as a platform, now it does 3.5 million transactions a day, valued at $4 billion a day. And in a year is about 1.2 billion transactions. And our single largest transaction was for 19.8 billion. We are seeing the growing of the Pay ID. The use cases are actually beyond our expectation. And we now have over 14 million Pay ID registered, and which is about at our population around 20.7 million. And approximately 20% of the MPP payments are being made by Pay ID. And once the people started using the Pay ID, they have a very strong tendency to continue to use it. And 47% of the users saying that they use it at least on a weekly basis, if not daily. And one of the key benefits of the Pay ID is that you can get a confirmation of the person that you're paying before completed payment transaction. This has helped reduce the mistaken payments, but also playing a key role protecting consumer from fraud and scams, especially these days. Based on some of the research we did, that 1 in 4 Pay ID users actually told us that they had corrected the payment or stopped the payment because they could see who are they actually paying. So what is the focus today? We are now focusing on expanding the capability of that platform. So last year, we started to roll out what we call Pay2. So Pay2 is a new payment initiation service, which will enable bank customer to authorize their payment from their bank account. And this service will not be only able to modernize the way of the direct debit payments, but also can be used to support e-commerce and in-app payments, as well as payment facilitate on behalf of the bank customers, such as payroll, tax, and also the supply chain payments as well. And we really believe that the payment of the Pay2 will really modernize the way in which the bank account being used for payments, and will drive more innovation across the board for years to come. And what also later this year, the platform will also support the inbound cross-border payments with the delivery of our international payment business service. This will enable not only faster, but also more safer cross-border payments, as that the payment actually carry the data all the way from the point of initiation through the bank to the ultimate beneficiary. It will also enable as a key enabler or foundation for us to link the MPP to other real-time payment system and infrastructure around the world.
That's great. Thank you so much, May. I might hand over to Carlos Brandt now. So Carlos, Brazil's new real-time payment system, Pix, was introduced back in 2020, and it has seen spectacular growth in terms of transactions. Can you briefly explain some of the background to Pix, how it works, and the central bank's role in its development and operation?
Sure. Thanks, Brad. I will share the screen here just to put some figures on the screen while I make my intervention here. The first step that we took in the Pix roadmap was a deep dive assessment in our retail payment system, to try to understand the needs of our society and the gaps that we had in our existing payment instruments. And after that deep dive, it was very clear to us that we had a very strong case for building a new ecosystem from scratch. So in that deep dive, we found that individuals wanted a better electronic payment instrument with less friction, low cost, and high availability. So we could use it anytime. People already had smartphones with internet connectivity by then, and they were already had users of mobile apps like instant messaging apps, for example. And in that sense, they were ready to widely adopt a new digital payment instrument. And at the same time, businesses were facing a lot of challenges in receiving payments. High use of cash still, cost of acceptance of electronic payments, long time to settle payments and to receive funds, lack of information flowing with the payment, and so on. And I think a key aspect to design this new payment ecosystem from scratch, capable of meeting all those needs, was to adopt a co-creation approach with the central bank, the financial industry, and many other stakeholders like software providers working together since the beginning. So we first created in 2018 a working group set up the general framework of this instant payment ecosystem, having a set of public objectives in mind, brought from the central bank. And after this general framework was published at the end of 2018, we launched the Pix Forum in 2019, and that was a permanent body to, that was responsible for go deep into the specifications of technical and business aspects for implementation of Pix. In February 2020, we launched the Pix brand, which was a very important milestone, and which gave room to start the communication with the public about the new payment instrument that would soon be available for everyone. In 2020, we was also developed or dedicated to the development and the test phase to make sure that everyone would be ready for the go live. Just some days, think about a month, actually a month and a half before going live, we opened up the Alliance database to be populated in advance. So in that sense, since day one, everyone would be ready and would have their PIX keys registered and ready to be used. And in November 2020, so PIX finally went live with no delay. That was good. So the Central Bank of Brazil, in terms of the roles that we play, the Central Bank of Brazil has two different roles in the PIX ecosystem. One is the scheme owner, which means that we are responsible to define the rules for the provision of PIX payment service to the public. And the other one is to operate two different operational platforms that we have, the Alliance and anti-fraud database, and also the settlement infrastructure, both running 24/7. I think it's important to say here that the Central Bank of Brazil decided to play these two roles to be a neutral agent in the cooperation layer, making sure that we would have a level playing field for all PSPs and to reduce costs by having a non-profit entity in this cooperation layer. And having this active role in the ecosystem did not mean that we wouldn't have, or there wouldn't be room for competition. But the competition would be focused on the service level or on the service provision level, where PSPs are the ones that provide service to end users, like service like user interface, like user authentication, anti-fraud solution, and so on. So I think I'll end my intervention here by saying that we truly believe that we gain a lot of synergy having the central bank and the PSPs joining forces to offer better services to our society. I think the synergy in our case has turned out to be very strong, and I think the growth in PIX volumes is just one indication of it. We see on the screen here the very strong uptake of PIX in terms of PIX transactions. We had surpassed the mark of 1 billion transactions a month just a little bit before the first year of operation. So we reached the 2 billion transactions a month in mid-2022. And just now in last month, March 2023, we reached the 3 billion transactions a month. And this is quite impressive. We have 80% of the adult population as PIX users. That accounts for 37 million individuals using PIX. And out of all PIX transactions, 24% is P2M transactions, or our P2M transactions, which is growing a lot in the last year. And if we put in, also, I have another slide here just to put into the domestic perspective, comparing with the other payment instruments. Just after the end of 2022, PIX were already the most used payment instrument in Brazil, just more than bill payments, debit card, and credit card, and it's still rising. So I think to conclude here, the synergy of central bank and private sector in the same ecosystem, I think has been very successful, and it's very strong. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Carlos. That's a pretty spectacular growth there. I'm just going to hand over to Steve Haley now. Steve, so we've seen research. So there's been recent research released by the Clearinghouse. So earlier this year, where they said we now see 79 countries that have, and they're across all continents, and now have at least one real-time payment system. So real-time retail payment system. So can you describe a bit of what you're seeing in the development markets generally? I know you're based in India, but you operate in a lot of different geographies. And what are the impact that these systems, you believe, are starting to have in terms of how they're starting to impact what's happening in those countries and more generally?
But I mean, first I'd say 79 active is amazing, but I haven't come across a single country that's not in the process of building and developing a real-time payment system. So it's absolutely not just one of those things that eventually maybe most countries might have them, and so we need to think about what does that mean for payments globally. It is going to be a thing that in the next 3 to 5 years, I think there will be a very small number of countries that don't have a real-time instant retail payment system. Unfortunately, the question on impact, I don't think we've seen yet because so many of them are so new. I mean, the only two countries that have seen the kind of growth that we can see impact very quickly have been in Brazil and India. And India looks like a laggard compared to what Pix is doing, even though everyone else is dreaming of India type growth numbers. But I mean, Rost in Pakistan just launched, BI Fast in Indonesia just launched, Tips in Tanzania just launched. So some of the ones that we're interested to keep our eyes on are still too new to actually have an impact on financial inclusion. And to actually report on that. But I think we're going to be seeing that in the next 2 to 5 years across the board. But I think the other thing is that some of them are further along in their understanding of what an instant payment system means and how they develop that. And I think some of the other trends that we are seeing though is when people look at the experiences of India, of Brazil, of Australia, like I mentioned in my opening, it doesn't look like the countries that we work in Africa and Southeast Asia, where the vast majority of, and actually across a lot of the other countries in the Americas as well, where so many people are not served by banks, the vast majority. And so it's not an edge case that has to be the primary case. And the nuances of how you do that, I think, are incredibly important. And I think that there's a massive divide between the goals of ISO 20022, which we're highly supportive of, but then also the ability of some of the smaller financial institutions and non-banks to comply with them. And so making sure that we find a way to include that. And on the same thing, like Carlos mentioned, I mean, it's smartphone-driven QR payments. I think it's what everyone is seeing, and we're seeing that as well. However, USSD is still the primary mode of use in most of the market in Africa that we work in. And so if we basically just say, well, we got to wait until USSD is dead before you can come on board, we're going to be excluding a lot of people. We can't do that. And so we've got to make sure that we enable all these products to suit the users where they are right now. And that includes things like USSD. And so I do think that we are starting to see more discussion around things like around how do we drive financial inclusion? How do we not just say, well, this is the model that has worked in a number of countries, let's just replicate it. We actually have to think, how do we go back to our fundamentals to make sure that the systems that are being built in these emerging markets are suited for these markets. I mean, another one that we can talk about, those three countries we're talking about here of India, Australia, and Brazil, is that these countries have built their own systems. And I think we're going to talk about how do you adjust for the constantly changing environment that's going to happen. But for a lot of countries that don't have the resources, human and financial, to actually build and modify their own systems as they go through this, they're kind of stuck with what they're sold. And what they're sold in a big government procurement or development bank procurement process, which is really driving them into not a non-optimal solution. And I think that's kind of one of the other trends that we're starting to see is a lot of countries are making a start, realizing that 3-year procurement process that they just went through did not take them down the path they hoped it would go. And now they have to start over again. So again, I think that's what's going to continue to cause some delays, and everyone's kind of anticipated we're going to see great financial inclusion impact in these real-time payment systems. I think it's going to take a little while until we see it for all those reasons. But I do, yeah. And the last thing I'll close with in terms of what we are seeing is, I think when a lot of us got excited about instant payments and what it can do and what interoperability can do, is really driving around P2P transactions or account-to-account transactions, and not to dismiss the importance of them, but I think every single country we're talking to right now is saying, okay, that's a given. Talk to us about merchant payments and talk to us about cross-border payments. And I think hopefully we'll talk about that later. But yeah, the drive for, now that there's 79 countries and soon 179 countries, now we have to make sure that all these systems can talk to each other. and talk to each other in a way that the smaller countries get included equally, which means bilaterals for cross-border should be out, and also the smaller financial institutions need to be included equally, which means that standards that rely on or systems that rely on standards that were created for European or North American or wherever banks are probably not the ones that we need to be thinking about. So I'll end mine there.
That's great. Thank you very much, Stephen. I think, and we'll explore a lot of those issues. That's great. I mean, I agree with you. Cross-border interlinkages, financial inclusion, but also the whole procurement issue. I know PIX is, done a lot of their work in house, and even though it's a central bank, it's done a lot of the work in house, and it's taken a very nimble approach. So I think we'll explore some of that a bit later. I want to talk a little bit about collaboration. So May, I'll start with you, and we'll have a bit of an open forum here now. So how important is collaboration in launching and making a real-time payment successful, and how can we learn to collaborate better? So what are the keys to good collaboration?
Sure. So collaboration is absolutely critical, and it is a central core in getting the real-time payment system running in this country. As we all know, that payments actually requires a network effect. And if we can't get that network in place, it's almost not possible or very hard to drive up the usage and also the future adoption to scale. So the MPP came about is due to a very strong collaboration efforts across the Australian payment industry, and together with the support of our central bank, which is our Reserve Bank of Australia. It took hundreds of people spending thousands of hours designing and building this MPP ecosystem and getting it to the market. So at an early stage, we realized that the importance of distinguishing between what needs to be collaborative space and what should be kept as a competitive space between the competing organizations. Because to build this ecosystem, we do have different participants in this space, and they potentially, or they are still remain as a competing organization. So for example, how payments should get processed between banks is in the collaborative space. And it is important to ensure that it is done in a consistent way. Likewise, the treatment of data, for example, within the payment message is also ensuring that it passes through end to end in a consistent manner is absolutely critical as well. Fraud is another example that is an area that collaboration will benefit everyone, and working together results in a better outcome. So very early stage, we started to define what are some of the boundaries upfront, so we can really help of the collaboration. The other area that we do was to also realize at early stages that what are the non-negotiable, what are the mandatory capability that is critically to deliver this ecosystem, this network effect. And that's why that with the MPP, we focus on all participating organizations. So it's not just big or small, it's all participating organizations, ensuring that they can provide certain capability on the receive side of their payer customers. So with Pay2, for example, that we require all financial institutions that support their banking customer being able to authorize the Pay2 agreement in their existing banking channels. So that's a consistency in terms of the experience, and being able to process any of the payment associated with that Pay2 agreement as well. So there's I can carry on later on, but from the collaboration perspective is bringing the best of breed of the industry to come together and work together.
Yeah, that's great, and I agree. I think you've done an amazing job there, and bringing online new initiatives like Pay2 is really exciting. Carlos and Steve, any views on collaboration and how can we learn to collaborate better, both within jurisdictions and maybe, as Steve was indicating, in a cross-border sense? So either of you want to add some further comments on that?
Well, I mean, I can say very quickly, I work for an open source foundation, so collaboration is kind of the core of what we do.
It's at the heart of what you do, isn't it? Yeah.
But I would say, I'd separate into both domestic and international collaboration that we need to think about. I mean, Mojaloop was based off of the level 1 principles that was developed by the Gates Foundation, and you can probably sum up most of the level 1 principles in the way May described the collaboration, having all of the participants come to the same table and discuss what their requirements are. And And I think that's incredibly important. And we've seen a few examples of that, like one of the projects that we've worked on in Myanmar. They actually have all of the participants, which are all non-banks, come together every 2 weeks. Even if they have nothing to report, just to, everybody gets on the same Zoom call for 15 minutes to say, this is what we've worked on for the last 2 weeks and what are anyone's issues, just to have that regular, constant communication between the participants has been absolutely amazing. So I do think that's incredibly important at a domestic level. And then at an international level, I've already said this, but ISO 2822, awesome. I think everyone's probably quite familiar with Project Nexus and where they're going, and we think that's an amazing initiative as well. But I do think that a lot of those do need to start thinking of what's going to be the impact on those users who are and citizens who are using mobile money using USSD. May not get included into some of those if we're not careful. And so I think how we think about standards internationally is going to be incredibly important. Another one is QR. As QR does become kind of the standard, are we going to have to go to a global standard on QR that's going to make instant payments as ubiquitous as credit cards, because acceptance is really going to be everywhere. We are probably going to have to start thinking about that.
Yeah, excellent. Carlos, collaboration, you got any further insights? I mean, you mentioned the PIX forum and obviously the central bank working closely with participants in the system, but how do you do collaboration well? What is the secret in terms of collaborating well with industry participants, particularly from a central bank perspective, which again, has a unique role, obviously, in the role of the economy. Can you maybe provide some insights there?
Sure. Well, I think we all agree that collaboration is critical. I think I would put collaboration on the top of the list of key factors here. But I would like to add a different perspective here in collaboration. I think, of course, we have to get all PSPs on the table and have constant dialogue with them. But I think we also must have a very wide perspective on collaboration, with a very open dialogue, not only with the financial industry, but also with other stakeholders like government bodies, software providers, businesses, associations, the press, law firms, and so on. Because the instant payment is not made for the financial system itself, right? It's made for the society, it's made for the individuals, for the companies, for the governments, and so on. I also put the society in the scope of the collaboration for some subjects here, especially those subjects that have great impact in the public. So one way of getting collaboration from the public is to put selected subjects into public consultation, for example. So to give the opportunity for the whole society to provide input and feedback. So I really believe, I think we all agree, collaboration is key for building a stronger payment ecosystem. And of course, collaboration requires a lot of work, a lot of energy from us. So that's the reason that we think that we can collaborate better with a specific bodies and dynamics, like we have here. You mentioned, Brad, the PIX forum, with the forum being a place for continuous discussion about various issues of the ecosystem, and of course engage the PSPs as well to develop good solutions for end users. PIX forum is composed of different working groups, special group on security, and so on, so we can put the right people into the discussion.
That's great, Carlos. Thank you so much. Carlos, I'll stick with you. And I mean, these are complex, multi-year, multi-stakeholder initiatives, and things don't necessarily always go to plan. So when there are bumps in the road, hiccups, delays, how do you get things back on track? Are there any instances or examples you can provide us in terms of where you were able to do a bit of a course correction? And I think this is an important discussion in terms of, where some of the other initiatives are at the moment.
Yeah, it is a very important discussion. Well, first of all, here, I think it's very important to dedicate enough energy to think of every single detail in the design of the ecosystem, so we can try to avoid as much as possible to have bumps in the road. But of course, they happen, and we must be prepared to deal with them when they appear. One example I can think of now was the issues that we had with QR code payments in the beginning. Just after the go live, our monitoring team noticed that we were having more rejected payments than we expected, although not too high. And when we took a deep dive on these rejected payments, most of them were coming from QR code payments and from specific PSPs. And we realized at that time that we did not have the, let's say, the adequate test plan for QR code payments, and that some PSPs had implemented them in the wrong way. So we had to react very quickly to fix that. We immediately issued an additional test phase for QR code payments, while our IT team developed in a very fast way a QR code tester to be used in this new test phase, and that was fixed in a very quick way, which was very good. But bottom line here is that we must be prepared to monitor the ecosystem, and as a scheme owner, to be prepared to react very quickly, and of course to lead the solution, engaging on PSPs to do so as fast as possible, as soon as possible. And of course, this is especially to maintain the confidence in the product, which is key for adoption.
Yeah, that's great, Carlos. May, can I ask you similar sort of question? Have you seen instances where there's been challenges or difficulties where you've had to sort of overcome them, and sort of maybe sort of some similar experiences that Carlos explained, particularly in terms of how you need to kind of circle back with industry? You got any good examples of that?
Yeah, I do. Actually, probably there's two instances I can share that are quite relevant. Firstly, just want to say that it is so important to acknowledge that aiming for the universal consensus is really unlikely. So, but we do need to have the majority support in order to make it successful. So before the MVP went live, a lot of time that we actually spent agreeing what are the minimum go live criteria, not MVP, but the go live criteria that collectively as an industry that we agree and will be sufficient in order to make that platform available to the end users and have that network effect. And expecting that all bands to be ready at the roughly same time is never going to be realistic. So you also need to understand what is enough of that network effect to ensure people can be able to start using it, but not going to affect the take-up of that. So establishing that clear criteria well in advance of that go live decision. So besides the criteria, the decision is also that's very important for all participating organizations had the visibility. So particularly given that individual bands will inevitably end up having different delivery timeline, and that is very likely, highly likely that it would change over the course of implementation. It took us years to get to the implementation point of the to launch. So having that criteria clearly established and make it as a fact-based decision is really important, rather than a very subjective and open to argument or open to interpretation type of different variants of opinion. So another example that is that it also it took us about 7 years to get paid to go to markets. So that has certainly had lots of hiccups and delays along the journey. So some of those involve the differences in the opinion of how the service should be designed and operate. So it is important, very important during the journey that we spend time working with the industry together to nut out what are the optimal design and running that's all these alternative suggestions to grant at the appropriate time. So that, yes, it meant that the design process took longer than we would have hoped. But now we are very confident that the decision and the ultimate outcomes are optimum. So we were never like planning to get to a complete consensus on the decision, but ultimately it came down to what the majority of the participating organization supports. And back to the early point Steve made, that it is also ensuring that the smaller institution as much as the large ones on these decision-making processes to get that over the line. So it's also very important too.
Great, thanks, May. Steve, I might just throw back to you. You raised the issue of the importance of having the smaller players around the table, but I think May pointed out the challenge of getting consensus. So, you know, how do we deal with these challenges? How do we find that sweet spot in terms of getting the network effects and the volumes with realizing that you're not going to get 100% to sign off on something? What are some of the tips and traps, I guess, in terms of trying to deal with that and deal with the inevitable sort of delays and challenges that'll throw up?
I mean, the first thing that we found is that, and I think Tanzania is a great example of where this has worked well, is starting with principles. And the first thing you do is say, this is our objectives. These are our principles of our payment system. And then that way, when those hiccups do happen, when you don't have consensus, then you can always go back to the principles and say, well, are we at least aligned with the principles that we aimed for this system to have? Is this going to damage is this going to push us towards our objectives? Particularly because you will sometimes get institutions that do have an interest in pushing a design that is not going to be aligned with the inclusion or whatever the principles that the payment system intends to have. And that way it's very easy to say, nope, actually you're wrong. We all agreed on these principles out from the beginning. The other is to have, especially in countries, like I'll use maybe the Philippines as a great example in my opinion of the way they've done governance, that there's almost 500 rural banks, a number of fintechs, and what they do is they have a body that has a rotating governance, and representatives from each of the different class of financial institution get representation on that. So you don't have to have consensus of 600 financial institutions, but you have actually clear voting and clear rotating responsibilities within that governance. So as long as you set up the governance in a way that is, I mean, I think we've all seen national payment systems that have one institution, one vote messes that they have to untangle, where you can never get all the institutions to agree, and small institutions can hijack the growth by having an outweighed number of or percentage of the votes. So I think those are some of the ways that we've seen. But yeah, starting with the principles, I would say in terms of some of the hiccups that you see that need to come over, I'll get on my procurement bandwagon again. And the biggest one we often see though is that when a country starts off, they don't know exactly where they're going to end up. And when it turns out, okay, we do need to change this up, going back to the vendor and saying, hey, the way we wrote our RFP was not exactly right. We need to do a change request. Well, cool. Here's the new price. It's double what it was before, and the vendor has to look out for their revenue. But that's the way these payment systems are going to develop. Like in India, everyone's excited about UPI, but we've had IMPS here since 2011. We've had instant account-to-account transactions, but it wasn't until much later that we introduced UPI ID. It wasn't until much later we introduced third-party payment initiation, and then later that we introduced QR. And so if you don't have the ability to iterate like that together with your ecosystem, you're not going to be able to get to that kind of growth.
Thanks, Steve. Steve, I might just quickly stay with you. These systems, they're often built on multiple use cases, and we discussed is not just P2P. So how can these real-time systems find that balance between providing the functionality needed to support innovation with the desire to see the ecosystem driving that innovation? How do we find that balance?
And first, I'll say I want to hear Carlos's answer to this one, because everyone's very excited of the way Brazil has done this. But I mean, I think one of the ways that having a clear, and I think May use this term, a clear collaboration space and competition space between saying this is what the financial institutions, where you collaborate on the services that you provide to your customers, the experience you provide to your customers, whereas the rails and the rules that connect the institutions is a clear collaboration space. And I think one of the ways that we liked about what UPI did that we've incorporated into Mojaloop is the third-party payment initiation service provider, and that we think is a massive way in which you can say, well, we want to make sure you have an option of a good payment experience, and we know that maybe not all the banks are going to provide that. And so at least having a system by which third parties can provide that type of initiation service, we think is a major growth in, may not be a growth space for product building within banks, but is a growth space for a fintech ecosystem in a country to serve the clients of those banks. And I would say that's probably where we have fallen in terms of that, is to say there has to be a way in which the innovators in the fintech ecosystem can more directly access the instant payment network, and so that they can more easily access the banked customers. Again, the way we've done that is to allow them to connect directly to the hub. So again, here in India, we have 3 providers who are all multi-billion-dollar companies who have 100% of the market share, because they're the ones who have the resources to go out to all the customers and go out to all the banks. We would say hopefully a system that allows the fintechs to connect directly into the hub and therefore instantly have access to all of the financial institutions is going to serve smaller fintechs and smaller financial institutions more equitably than one that relies on bilateral agreements between payment initiation service providers and banks. So that's probably the one innovation that we're focused on in terms of creating innovation in the ecosystem.
Yeah, that sounds great. Steve, you gave a bit of a shout out to Carlos there. Carlos, did you want to talk a little bit about finding that balance between sort of providing that centralized functionality and driving innovation in the marketplace?
Sure. Yeah. I think the balance between cooperation and competition leads to a good balance between providing the functionality needed to support innovation with the ecosystem driving innovation. It requires a lot of cooperation, collaboration to actually understand the needs of all agents and to bring together the information to turn this need into functionalities in the ecosystem. So rules and specifications that can provide adequate support for the PSPs to design products in a way that they can be suitable for all type of end users. So no matter if it is a low, medium, or high income person, a small, medium, or large company, or local, state or federal government, for example, so it has to be good for all end users. So PSPs can then work to achieve the objective of having multiple use cases in this payment instrument with different products or services, including niche solutions. On the other hand, to have enough PSPs to build solutions for everyone, we need competition, right? So it's therefore very important to have an open and level playing field environment. So bringing in not only the big players, the big banks, but also different types of institutions, fintech, credit unions. I mean, no matter what type of institutions that want to offer payment service to the end users, and of course, it's under the payments regulation, they have to be allowed to the ecosystem in an effective way, not only a written rule, but in an effective way. And as I said before, I think the central bank has a very interesting position in being a neutral agent capable of promoting cooperation where it is key, and also pushing for competition where it's needed. So that's my point here, Brett.
Great. Thank you very much, Carlos. We're sort of moving into the final 5 minutes now of our session. So I might just give everyone an opportunity to do a couple of minutes of sort of closing thoughts. So I might just start with May. So May, if you can maybe give us a couple of minutes of your closing thoughts and just sort of some or any observations or key takeaways you think from today's session.
Yeah, sure. So I think we are like it's 2023, so we are living in this scaling world that is real time and it's borderless. So real time payment is a must. It's not a negotiable capability, and it is in fact an enabler for any possibilities for business to individualize. So I think that's the key takeaway is that from the digital disruptors or innovators or fintech perspective, really is to focus on how to harness this capability to add on the value-added services, the user experiences, and leveraging the rich payment data for more intelligent decisioning, automation, and hyper personalization. I think that these days that the payment capability need to be really purpose-led. And I think that I'll just bring it back from the AP Plus perspective that we are the purpose-led organization. And our purpose is around unite people and technology to power better experiences. And we deliberately didn't have the word of payments explicitly mentioned because we believe that we are, as the domestic payment provider, we are here to create value for Australia. We talk about financial inclusion. There's a role to play of removing those barrier to the financial inclusion and empowering everyone like Australian to do that. So I think that's the innovation outcome from the payment perspective. Having the foundation or the infrastructure of the real-time payment should be really thinking about how we make it open. So that's from the pricing perspective, that's can lower the margin for all the players to come to play, to make it more vibrant. So and also more sustainable. Yeah, so that's my closing remarks on that.
Great, thank you very much, May. Steve, any closing thoughts?
I think, I mean, as we've all said, this is something that's coming. It's here. It's no longer a question of if and when. It's now and happening. And I think for my main thoughts is that as people are thinking about, as countries are thinking about their instant payments journey and what they're going to be going on, is to think about the whole system. One of the things that we often find that hub operators or central banks focus on, and not in all cases, obviously, because we've heard otherwise from our two other panelists, but is that they look at how much is it going to cost to build this switch, and they don't look at all the other costs that are going to come into it. For example, the participation costs. And what we're finding is that in a lot of countries, that is kind of one of those hurdles that we talked about earlier, that it can cost sometimes up to 300 or between $200,000 and $400,000 US for financial institutions to finalize their connection into an instant payment system. And that's just way beyond the value that it's going to bring to a small institution. And so we have to start thinking about all of those costs, because in the end, it's the entire cost. It's not just the cost borne by the central bank or the hub operator that need to be extracted from the citizens. Right. It's the entire cost that needs to be extracted. And so we have to look at as many ways as we can to lower all of the cost for the financial institutions and the cost for the central bank and for the hub operator, as well as all the settlement costs, liquidity costs, so that in the end user can actually pay nothing.
That sounds great. And final thoughts, Carlos, 1 minute. So if you can just give us your headline views.
Sure, yeah. Just two closing quick thoughts on my side here. First, the importance of communication. As payment experts, we tend to focus on technical aspects, designing the system and so on. Although there are key elements in designing the system, we can't forget the importance of communication. You can have a great product, but if people are unaware of it, if they don't understand how it works, or if they don't perceive the benefit of it, your great product will not be used. It's just as simple as that. So I think having a wide communication plan is very important. And finally, I have a strong belief that instant payments can join forces with open finance, bringing power to the client and the CBDC, not competing with instant payments, but covering additional use cases like DeFi, IoT, and so on, to offer a complete set of solutions to meet all the needs that our society has in terms of payments. So thanks again. Thanks, everyone. and I stop here.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Carlos. And I'd like to thank all of my the panelists today for an amazing session. May Lam, Steve Haley, and Carlos Brandt, exploring real-time payments. Thanks again for a great session. And for those of you watching at Payments Canada Summit, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.